All right, live and recording. Welcome, everybody. We have Gary Pico, Wes Spencer, and David Powell. And this is day one of the Cyber Trifecta, and this is a standards-driven approach to manage security. Wes, just kind of tell us a little about your thoughts on this. We'll go around the horn, and then I'm going to turn it right over to you. This is a 1-hour session. Hope we have a ton of Q&A out of this. I've got a few polls I'll put up that Wes has queued me up for. You'll queue me up for those, correct, Wes?
Yeah.
But Wes, tell us a little about today, and we'll go around the horn, and we'll get right on into it.
Yeah, rock on. So everyone, thank you for joining me. And look at this, 616 attendees that have been joining this. I remember the early days of us talking about getting this thing going with our friends at Huntress and ID Agent, and seeing this all roll into fruition is awesome. So thank you guys for joining. Hey, look, so as we were building the content, we were thinking a lot about, we didn't want to have just technical only content. We also wanted to have some things that are there for those that either want to break from the CTF, or if you're somebody that's in sales or management, VP level, how do we talk and communicate cybersecurity? We wanted to make sure we had at least a snippet of that. And so that's what we're including. So my name is Wes Spencer. I'm the CISO at Perch. Most of you guys know Perch by now. Gary, you want to say hey, and then David, and then we'll jump into the content.
Yeah, hi, I'm Gary Pico, the president of True Methods, also one of the hosts on the Cyber Call. And yeah, Wes, today, one of the key things that we're going to do, look, you can know what to do technically, but if you work in an IT department, you have to get stakeholders on board. And if you're an MSP, you have to be able to get customers on board in a way where they'll make the right investment. So part's technical, but if you don't have the business part, it's no bueno, as I like to say.
Hey, and this is David Powell, and I'm the new. Do I still have the new car smell, Wes, or is it gone?
It's just slightly there.
Slightly so there. I started at Perch back in June. I'm thrilled to be here, and I come out of the MSP space. I've been in the MSP space for 20 plus years, and have had all the challenges of trying to get clients to do something about security when they all kind of know it's a problem, but how do we get them to act? And so that's some of the topics I want to explore today.
Right on. So these are the things we're going to be talking about. I'm going to close this in just a second, but I wanted to pop this up there. Follow us on LinkedIn. All four of us are very active. If you want to follow more and see the things we are talking, communicating, I've got that there, and I'll pop this in at the end as well. So just wanted to throw that on there for a minute. Okay, so we're talking about security standards today. Now, I have been a huge fan of security standards. Those of you that don't know me, I come out of the financial services industry. So I come out of enterprise. These are things that are like common for us to talk about. And Andrew, let's go ahead and drop in the first poll question. So the way that we three operate, we're going to hit off each other. We're going to be talking back and forth. But the more you communicate in the ask a question down below or using chat, the more we are going to be able to include you into this conversation, which will really make this thing take off. So first question, you can see it in the poll when Andrew gets it up, is what level of mapping does your MSP have to a compliance framework? And by the way, if you're not a managed IT provider and you're on this call today, no worries. The same concepts that we're going to talk about today for you inside your organization are going to hold true in that way as well. So, but I do want to ask that question. If you're an MSP or you're working in your own org, what level of mapping do you have to a compliance framework? Would you say that you're fully mapped? Would you say that you're partially mapped? Or would you say you're kind of in that I haven't really begun, but I want to? I'm really curious to get that. So when Andrew gets that poll question up, we'll see that below. Let's go ahead and jump in.
In other words, they lost the map.
Yes. So while we're waiting for that poll question to come in, there it is. It just showed up. So we want to take a look at this because this is going to give us some feedback. I don't see any fully mapped yet. Gary, that doesn't surprise me. Does that surprise you?
No, not at all. Absolutely. Okay. I'm happy that we're seeing some partially mapped. So that's making me optimistic.
Yeah, right on. In chat, while we're waiting for these to come in, will you just chat back and let us know what the compliance framework or frameworks are that you are mapping to? So I see one from Eric, CMMC, which makes a ton of sense, right, for those that are in the U.S. side of the house. But hey, one fully mapped. That's great. We got one on there. Yeah, go ahead and pop into chat because we're curious to know what frameworks you guys are following and mapping towards. And Gary, while we're doing that, while we're waiting, let's start with this. So when it comes to standards, what are we really trying to solve for cybersecurity in the SMB?
Yeah. So we're going to talk about it today from two perspectives. One, from the provider perspective, how do you evaluate yourself and your customers about where they are on that continuum if you don't have some base? And we see a lot of people are using CIS, they're using NIST, okay? And then the other thing is, how do you relate that to a customer in terms of what their business risk is if you don't have some box, right? I call it the box and the blob. If you don't have a box, right, which is your standard, the blob is each of your customers' environment. All you have is a blob, and if you have 20 customers, you have 20 blobs, right? So you're feeling whether they're secure or not. And I'm, me, Wes, I'm a feelings kind of guy, but not when it comes to this.
Makes sense. David, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's really hard is that a lot of MSPs are going in and talking to their clients, and the only kind of answer they have is this idea of like scare and sell. Like if I can scare the client enough, then they'll do something. And, we know that the SMBs have a tremendous amount of security risk. Things that used to be, the exclusive concerns of your Bank of Americas and your Kaiser hospitals, these big companies, now those same cyber risks are applicable to the smaller companies, but they don't have an IT staff to help them. They have an MSP to help them. So the MSP knows they have these needs. They know that they have these challenges. And they're like, okay, we got to get the client to move. We got to get the client to do something. And the answer too often is we're going to go in and scare them. So do this assessment, and then you kind of visualize like these 3 5-inch, 3-ring binders that they come and like drop on the client's desk. And they're basically like, see, here's all the things that you suck at, Mr. Client. And they want the client to be like, oh my gosh, I suck at all these things. I should do something about it. When instead, what it creates like this expectation gap to where, well, there's no way I can ever do those things, so I'm out, and they just don't even attempt to do it. And so what I really want to see is, more of this, like, how do we get them to go on a journey? How do we get them to move at all instead of this scare and sell approach? Because in my experience, the scare and sell approach really doesn't get the action that you want to see from the end users.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I want to include what Todd is saying here in chat, because he's also exactly right. Is vendors do the same thing. And he's right. Like every time I go to RSA, I go to Black Hat, you are inundated with, stopping the scary, thready threats before the threats happen, and the buzzwording that goes on that really means nothing. And we let marketers lead, and we end up with a whole bunch of like confusion. I think both clients are confused, stakeholders like CEOs and board members are confused about cybersecurity. And let's be honest, we are confused about cybersecurity because we oftentimes don't distill all of this. And so we kind of knee jerk back to scare and sell, don't we, Gary?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, not only do you not want to drop a report with 50 things that are wrong on someone's desk and use that as the main, what you want to do is say, listen, we've done this alignment against standards. We've uncovered some things. And what I want to do today is I want to start with, there's a bunch of them, but I want to start based on what I've learned about your business. I'm going to talk about 4 or 5 that are important and what the solution is, whether it's a project, whether they have to invest a little bit more monthly because we're adding some, new services and process to our stack, and say, look, this is going to get us the most bang for the buck. And so this quarter, these are the things that we want to focus on with you. Do you understand how they could impact your business? Then let's talk about some of the other ones. We'll like you said, we'll take you on that journey and put them out there. So many times though, MSPs see it as flat, right? As opposed to, if there's 20 things, there's usually 2 or 3, it'll get you 60-70% of the way there. And so you have to view it in that logical way. Standards is one way you're able to do that, because if you don't, how do you communicate that to a customer in a way that's organized, reasonable, where it seems like, wow, I can make this investment and I can get this in return for it? That makes sense to business people.
Yeah, it does make sense, because, I say this all the time. Business people aren't stupid, right? They're very smart people, but they understand risk and they understand their business and their operations processes. They're relying on you to become that trusted IT provider, right? And David, one thing you mentioned a second ago, I want to ask you this question. So, dropping the big stack of assessments, right? Like the 500-page assessment that you just did, that's not that effective, is it, right? So are you saying that we shouldn't use assessments when we go about solving these problems?
No, I think you use more meaningful ones. So, I know you're working on your home office there, Wes. So if I came into your home office and said, hey, Wes, let's replace all the sheetrock in this home office, you'd be like, well, David, I don't have the budget to replace the sheetrock. But if I, took a knife and like put a little line down the sheetrock and could pull it back and shine a flashlight back there and show you that it was covered in mold because, pipes were leaking behind there and all this kind of stuff. All of a sudden you're like, well, honey, we're not going on that vacation this summer. We've got to replace all the sheetrock, in the home office. And I think that's what clients you have to show them, right? Is there has to be something actionable. They don't know what they don't know. So some level of assessment, you got to show them the leaking pipes, and that creates, urgency. I got to do something about it. But that's not, hey, Wes, here's the 50 million things at your house that all stink, and now you got to do all this stuff at once, right? No. Let's just start here because mold is bad. We get that, and you move them along. And so, Wes has 4 kids, for those of you that don't know. And so Wes and I were talking about this. It'd be like if he went to a financial planner and said, hey, I need to save money to send my 4 kids to college, right? If the financial planner went and said, all right, Wes, that, sending 4 kids to college is going to be $50 million. So you got to start saving, $5,000 a week to send your kids to college. Wes would be like, well, forget it. I guess, my kids won't go to school, or I'll take out massive amounts of loans, instead of like, hey, Wes, could y'all stop eating dinner out once a week and let's just put that money in a college fund? And then you begin to kind of build, and you begin to kind of, one day you turn around and you're like, wow, I've saved all this money for college, just like how our 401ks work. That to me is what we have to do with our clients, is show them a reasonable, meaningful, actionable path to doing something better than they're doing it now, instead of the scare and sell, which creates this huge gap that they rather tap out than try to fill all those gaps that they have.
Yeah, that's a great point. And one thing Mihir says here in the chat, I want everyone to look at this. So he says, I'm not sure where, but I like this analogy of can't have security without compliance, can't be compliant without security. You're pointing something out that I think is really true and accurate in this world, is that there's kind of a yin and yang, or two ends of a line, right? When it comes to the world of cybersecurity, is true security is a piece of it and compliance is a piece. They are not the same thing, but they are closely related. One of the ways that I see this, and Gary, I want you to comment on this as well, is I look at compliance as setting the minimum bar, right? Like, I'm building my security, and the minimum says this. If I'm, PCI, if I'm a bank, healthcare, I'm DoD manufacturer, whatever, you have the luxury as an MSP by talking about the bare minimums, which is what compliance sets. But that doesn't set the maximum in almost every case, right? And we're not necessarily talking about getting to the maximum, but we are talking about doing what's required. And sometimes that requires going beyond compliance, right? And so, Gary, here's my question for you. I think with things like PCI that was just mentioned by Mark and others, it makes it easier for us to communicate, but it's not the be-all, end-all, is it, Gary?
No. And if you map it back to how an MSP does business, I think when you start to pick, you pick your framework. So a lot of people here are talking about NIST, right? 171. So you have to then agree on, hey, what is my process? What is my stack? Like, how do I match up with that? And when you go in, like you said, you set some minimum. This is what we do for every customer, right? So this is where we want people in alignment on these things. Then, depending upon your business, Wes, you may need something more than that, right? Your DoD, that's an obvious one, right? Your finance, as you mentioned. But if you don't have some standard that is your minimum, because it should be reflected in your offering as an MSP as well. And, you can't just go in and say, well, you can have bronze, silver, pewter, tin, and if they get tin, then they get no security, right?
Unobtainium.
Unobtainium, yeah. So I'm saying today that, the customers, they're not qualified to make those decisions, man. Like, at all. Like, we have to make those decisions for them and for ourselves and our risk, right, in it. Does that make sense?
Gary, I was a high school debater, and one of the things they taught us, all the cool kids were high school debaters too, by the way.
Yeah, I heard that.
Quarterback of the football team, high school debater, right? And so the way that they taught us, one of the things was like, lift an argument out of one setting and drop it in another. And if it doesn't make sense here, it probably doesn't make sense there. And so I used to tell the sales team at my last gig, I'm like, look, if you would not accept that in any other part of the world. So if you went into the orthopedic surgeon and said, hey, you need knee surgery, and he says, well, do you want the gold, silver, or bronze knee surgery? And you'd be like, well, what's the difference? He's like, well, the bronze doesn't have anesthesia, and we use instruments and all this stuff. You'd be like, wait, aren't you the expert? Didn't you go to medical school? Why don't you tell me what I need here? And so we would never accept it there, but clients know they don't know the answer to security. So why would we go in and let them choose from these options when they don't have any idea what the right answer is there?
And you know what's frustrating? When I say to people, hey, you got 5 different offerings, which is the right one where you have everything to manage customers probably and keep them secure? They always say, this one. It's usually the most expensive one. And then why do you have all the rest? And they say, because people want options. That's what they'll buy. I'm like, well, your sales aren't that great. So I don't think it's working, in that way. And
hey, Wes, we have a unicorn in the chat. Ed was a quarterback and on the debate team. That is a rare thing.
That is a rarity. Indeed, that's a rarity.
Was he on the math team too? Was he a mathlete?
He must be. Yep, chess champion, the works. Yes, Ed, I think we all want to be like you, sir. Hey, and Isher says something really good too. He's saying, total security is a myth. He says, but at best we can try to get close to that, right? And he's right. That's exactly right. Oftentimes, and when my board would ask me at the bank, hey, how are we doing after I do my board report of where information security is at? Oftentimes I would get a question of like, hey, well, what do you think about all this? Interpret this for me. Are we secure? And I would always answer back kind of joking. I'd be like, let me go check again, right? Because security is about a process, isn't it? Security is not about we are secure. Maybe all of our checks are green lights right now and our processes are running smooth and all the things we've done look good for now, but that can change in a moment's notice, right? And so educating our customers that this is a process that doesn't change, this is not a milestone that we complete and then we're done, that is dangerous. And I do think a lot of MSPs, David, give me some comments on this, feel like in the past they've sold security as a do these things and you hit this and now you're secure, only to have things change like we've had in the past 2 to 3 years of security. And now they have to go back and eat crow and say, well, you know what, maybe things are changing. They don't know how to have that conversation, do they?
Yeah, there's a couple of things in there. So one is I feel like sales teams for MSPs are scared of answering the question of their clients around, whoa, I thought you were already doing this for me, right? And like Gary said earlier, is that we don't like to have that. We're not used to talking to people about risk. We're used to talking to people about technology. And so a lot of SMBs view cybersecurity as a technology issue, not as a risk issue. And then the MSP is the group that does my technology. And so how do you overcome that challenge talking to the client about, hey, I'm here to talk to you about cybersecurity? And whoa, I thought you were already doing that for me. And now you're playing defense, right? The other thing is that I like healthcare analogies because everyone's been to the doctor, so it's something they can relate to. And it's kind of like the idea of being healthy, right? There is no status of I am healthy, right? Is that you still could get run over by a truck. You still could die of cancer. If you went to the doctor every single day, that's still not a state of I am healthy. You could be healthier, right? Just like with security, there is no final state of you are secure. The CIA is not secure, right? So there is some level of being increasingly more secure, just like you want to be increasingly more healthy. And for everybody, those look a little different based on, are you trying to run a marathon or are you just trying to drop some weight? What are your goals? What are you trying to accomplish? And there's a different regimen for that. Similarly, what does your compliance and regulatory environment look like? And then you have different things you need to do based on someone else's, profile there.
Yeah, that's really good. Gary, you work with lots and lots of partners. In your experience, getting to that idea of process through security, how many of your partners understand that right away? And how many of them do you have to build those concepts in? What are the ramifications when they finally learn it?
Well, let me do 2 things. Can I start with something Zach said and then relate it back to this? Because I think it's a great setup. He said, speaking in business terms is difficult. So, that part I would agree with until you know how. And that's why we're saying using standards. And I'll give some examples with, my peer members that I work with and what's happened over the past few months. But then later you said coronavirus doesn't help either. That part, I would say my famous statement, I couldn't possibly disagree with you more. right? Coronavirus has been the best thing that ever happened because everyone knows that their topology has changed. Everyone knows that there's been, new security risks that are out there. So it's actually helping a lot of business owners and VCIOs that were more technical based. This is a great reason to talk to people about their business. And so relating that to your question, Wes, which is my customers that already had standards in place and do regular alignment. They're doing, they're doing alignment pretty much every month in some form or another. After they made all these changes, for work from home and whatnot, and they did them quickly, they were able to go back to their customers and say, hey, listen, look what happened to your alignment score. Here's the things that we had in place that we don't now. And here's the recommendations. And sometimes it was projects. Hey, they packaged the, $2,000 or $3,000 two-factor authentication project. And other times it was, hey, because of this, we're dealing with some new risks that we didn't even have 3 months ago, right? And look, we made some changes in our process. We've added some tools to our stack. It's going to be about $400 a month for us to close these gaps. And they're having such success because they already had those muscles built, right? The second best time to do it is right now. Because again, those standards and that alignment process, that auditing against the compliance, that's the base of the model, Wes.
Yep. Indeed it is. And I want to come back to another comment here, really good points. And thank you for clarifying. So he's saying, it doesn't also help that standards are so vague and yet so specific in what they're asking for, right? Can I get a show of hands in the chat? How many of you either now or when actually let's just ask now, currently for you today, when you open up and look at some kind of standard framework, how often do you get intimidated by it? A yes or no? Like, is that intimidating? Is it something that's like secondhand? Because let me just say, the first time I opened, even to some degree today, you open the big Excel spreadsheet for CSF, that can be intimidating, right? Even to me today, and this is what I've been doing for years, it can feel intimidating. And we have a problem in this industry of communicating standards down market to SMB. If we get intimidated, yep, look at them coming in, and a few no's, and that's cool too. But David, question for you. So when compliance standards are intimidating for us, how in the world are we supposed to communicate that clearly to our end users who also probably don't understand it?
Yeah, it's hard, but I will say that, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king, right? So if you know a little about it, you know more than your clients do, right? And so the education piece, if you kind of think about different sales approaches, teach, tailor, take control, all those things, but that teaching component of going in and explaining to the client, this is what's actually happening. And I'll say, I think that there's been this huge problem in the business world to where there's this false sense of security. And I often talk about, if the three of us lived in the same neighborhood and somebody broke into one of our houses, Facebook would light up, the Next Door app would light up, and people would be texting like, hey, something bad's happening in our neighborhood, and we would all be vigilant. Nor would we disparage the people who got their house broken into. It's not like we'd be like, haha, Gary's house got broken into. We'd be like, oh, that sucks. How do we, improve all that? But in the business world, we don't talk about it. We don't talk about breaches. So it creates this false sense of security to where everyone thinks that it's not going to happen to them and they live in a good part of town, when most people live in like the bad part of town and everyone's getting breached. There's just no one's talking about it. So it doesn't create that sense of, urgency around it. So there's this education, number one, around, what are the real risks? What are kind of the standards out there? This education around it could happen to you. And that's where Wes and I have done a lot of talking in the office around. We need to equip our MSPs need to equip their sales team with real world stories of like, hey, here's how this happens, right? And this is what the consequences are for you, that the client can see themselves inside this story. Instead of it being all abstract, there's bad guys wanting to do bad things. How does that translate? Well, Wes, this is what that looks like. This happens, this happens, this happens, and now you're, ransomware and don't have any backups. So I feel like there's this education that has to occur around the standards. There's this education that has to occur around what their actual risk is in the environment. And then I think there's this education around how an exploit happens so that they can connect with that and see their own vulnerabilities. And then that, in my opinion, creates the desire to want to do something about it.
Wes, I have a whole team, right, that for the past 6 or plus years, we basically teach MSPs, have been teaching people how to implement, an alignment process, whether that's to their own standards or now, security standards. So I'll tell you the number one thing that we impress upon people that are at the, and we have a bunch of them here at the very beginning, to take it in steps. They have 30 clients and they want to take, 5 different standards, or they want to take all of, 171. And this quarter, we're going to go do every client with whole. And I'm like, no, you're not going to do that. So why don't we make a plan over a couple quarters and commit to it? We're going to take, we have 30 clients, hey, we're going to take these 2 sections and do all 30, or we're going to take 3 sections that we think are important, and we're going to do our first 15, half of the client base. Then next quarter, we're going to decide that next step. And so that you are actually doing something that's impacting your business and the customer's business. And I always tell people, I know now you realize how important it is, but you've been in business for 10 years and you haven't done it. Like, let's take our time and do it right. Have your team build confidence, and it makes them go through a process of knowing, like, okay, if there's 100 things, what are 10 most important ones and why are they? So even just deciding what to do first, synthesize it, but that would be the number one mistake and the number one good decision on the other side, that when people do it in chunks, they almost always ramp up to it. And once you've been through the process once, now you're just looking for misalignments. It's much easier to keep going than it is to get started.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is really true, right? Just that journey of 1,000 miles, single step analogy, right? There's so much truth to that, and I can definitely agree. I think I remember the first time I walked into that bank. I did not come from financial services, and I've never shared this story, but I'm gonna share this today. First week on the job, you know who was in the door of my bank? My federal examiners. So here I come out of my previous job, my previous industry, in which I was a professor of information security, and I had some other jobs and different things before that. But literally day one on the job, like, oh yeah, by the way, when you start, FDIC is in, and they would like to interview you. Right? That's a little intimidating, right? And so he sat down and he was grilling me with questions. He's like, I know you're new. I know this is your first day on the job. I'm like, yeah, you think? But you know what it came down to? I'm like, okay, I don't know financial regulations, so I'm just going to go back to the basics. He's like, what are you going to start with? How are you going to begin your security strategy at this bank? And I'm like, we're going to start at policies. We're going to start at learning and making sure we're adhering and mapping not just to what FFIEC says, but also to best practices. And we're going to look at frame. And he loved the answer. He's like, that, I wish everyone would give that answer. I'm like, well, thank God, because that was the only thing I knew to say. But that really is the beginning, right? Is just saying, hey, I'm going to get started in this. Sometimes for us, it's like learning a second language. But David, that's okay, isn't it? I mean, not all of us, I don't think anybody just wakes up speaking security frameworks and security terminology right out of birth, right?
Yeah, no, it's all learned. And I think that that's a challenge with MSPs, to be honest, Wes, is that, most of our security gurus at Perch came out of kind of the practitioner space, right? Like you came from financial services and stuff. And, I think when you're looking to build an automation practice, let's say in your MSP, you go to somebody on your team, and the guy that learned Python on the weekend and the guy that, likes scripting. And so they kind of have that embedded knowledge. But a lot of MSPs don't have that embedded security knowledge. So they have to go either bring it in, or if they do have it, it's scarce. And so then they have to figure out, okay, we've got 2 guys, 3 guys, 4 guys. Do we apply them to fixing our client security environment, or do we apply them to looking at our own security environment? And, it's just a scarce resource. And so having that credibility on your staff is kind of gating issue one, and then you have to figure out how do we deploy them and how do we utilize them most effectively is kind of the second big question there.
But I mean, the number one thing I hear, when I, am on a webinar questions, it's about they can't get their clients to do it. They can't get prospects to spend enough, to do it. And most of the time, those people, they don't have a process or standards. Even just that process of applying those standards to your own stuff, your own MSP. When you get that, every client I've watched work through this, they get this realization about how much work and process and dedicated roles it takes to do this right. And then to their clients. So when they get in front of a client, they have such confidence, right, to know that they can actually start to weaponize a prospect's low price. Wes, I told this on one of the cyber calls, but I like to tell my
I want you to tell it again. It's
my
too good
cigar
not to.
story. So during the pandemic, I've been getting together with some business people in my neighborhood for a socially distanced cigar and sometimes an adult beverage on a Thursday after work, and they all own small businesses between 10 and 30 employees. And we got talking about, did they go work from home? What was going on with their business, PPP, everything. And I started saying, like, well, how did you address these things around, backup? Like, what do you, and security when you made those changes? Well, what do you mean? Well, how did your provider address this? Well, so I started asking them more questions, and they all started leaning up in their chairs and I started explaining to them, like, hey, here's how this works. And here's the risk. And here's the conversations that every provider should have been having with you right now. Let me ask you, do you know how much you pay your providers? And they all told me monthly what they pay. And then they told me how many employees they had. So I figured out their seat price. And I'm like, I got bad news for you. Anyone who's charging you less than this can't possibly keep you secure. Let me show you the math. And had I still owned an MSP, I've had two. I don't have one currently, although if anybody's looking to sell, I'm always a buyer. But had I had an MSP, Wes, I would have had 5 prospects, immediately right there, without pulling out reports, without giving them a stack of stuff. In fact, I was the first VCIO in my first MSP, and I used to go in loaded for bear with stuff, and I couldn't get decision makers that want to come back to. They weren't as interested in security and patch management as I was, right?
Yeah.
But when I started having these cigar conversations, with them, I made these relationships that have been lifelong. They took my recommendations. That kind of sums it up.
Yeah, it does. And David, I want to ask you a very similar question because you've been in the same boat before, right? And here's kind of what I want you to espouse. Like, so we've been in this boat a lot of times. Like, we're not talking today about margins, but we all know at the end of the day, if we are going to enhance a cybersecurity offering and go from just firewall and AV and start doing the things we need to do that actually are compliance map, it's not just vendors and tools, it's people and processes wrapped around. But for sure, all of those things eat our margins, right? The big fear everyone on this call has today is, how do I pitch that? Because they're going to come back to me and they're going to say that's more expensive than the guy down the street. Or if you're sitting inside your own organization and you're not working in an MSP, but you're on this call, you're thinking, same thing, how do I pitch that to my board or my IT steering committee, right? So David, what's the answer there when everyone says, well, you're more expensive by double than this guy over here?
Yeah, it really comes back to teach, tailor, take control, right? So you got to teach them. So you have to educate them on what it is, what you're doing for them. A lot of that comes down to that idea between like foundational and advanced security. So, hey, Mr. Client, we're doing foundational security for you, which is all signature based, right? So that's AV and that's patch and all that kind of stuff. Then there's advanced security, which is all anomaly based. And that's going to be, endpoint detection and SIM and all that kind of stuff. And so we're looking for anomalies in advance. So you have to teach them, number one. So when their other guy comes in to talk to them, that he's painting them in a corner going, oh, wait, this guy's only doing foundational security. He's not talking to me about anything, advanced. You have to tailor your message, right? So what is their risk tolerance? What is their compliance and regulatory environment? Are they healthcare or are they a dry cleaners? But if they're dry cleaners that stores credit card in their system, well, now they've got PCI, compliance things. So you have to tailor your message to them, and then take control is you have to guide them. You have to show them, hey, this is where you need to go from my position of expertise. And that's where little phrases like what we see with clients like you, right, is that everyone's looking for the cheat code, right? Everybody's looking for the answer to the test, up, up, down, down, left, right, start, select, VA, or VA, start, select. And so, but the idea is like, if you can say, hey, what we're seeing with other clients, you're de-risking it. No one wants to go first. No one wants to be that, outlier. So if you de-risk it by like, hey, here's what we're seeing other people like you, Wes, do. They're doing this thing. They're taking these steps. They're beginning to implement this. Now you've de-risked it. They feel like, oh, okay, there's a little bit of peer pressure in that, or no one wants to be the one on the outside not doing the thing. But you have to teach them why it's important. You have to tailor your message based on who they are. And then you have to show them where they need to go. And again, not provide gold, silver, bronze. Don't let them pick. Tell them what the right answer is for them.
All right. So we're getting really close. I want to come back to standards again, right? Because we're getting really right back into the content of today's talk, which is simply this. Gary, question for you, right? Getting back to standards, it seems like unless a customer is regulated, they don't really care about standards all that much. So what role does a standard play and what role doesn't a standard play? And while you're answering that question, Andrew, if you could get the second poll question queued up, because that's really going to gear into what we're talking about next.
So can I put this in the context of a sales presentation?
Please.
Okay. So one, I'll give people a couple little things you can do. Every time you're in front of a prospect or a customer too, this goes without saying, ask them some questions, about their business and what they do. And then I always like to ask them, who do you compete against? Who are like your main competitors? And when you compete against them, what do you charge on average? What do they charge? And I find out, are they a high price or low price? I make them explain their business model, and I tuck that away so I can use it later. Then you're going to go and you're going to ask some questions to uncover pain. And sometimes, we're going to lead them. Like with security, we can ask questions to help them. Like sometimes we have to show them where the pain is. Then when it gets to the point where we want to weaponize low price, right? Because we're going to be like twice as much or $1,000 a month more on a $4,000 deal. We want to relate that back to our process. So I'll always bring a process example. Hey, let me give you an example. We talked about an issue you had around passwords. This is just one standard. Here's the 23 questions that we're asking on a regular basis just about passwords. I didn't even ask you about those 10 other things. One, do you see why this takes some time and effort? Two, do you understand why my customers don't deal with the same things that your customers do? They say yes. I'm like, look, you got 40 employees here. What are your overall monthly expenses? 400, 600,000 a year? With what you've dealt with that supports all this, whether I charge you 5,000 or 6,000, do you really care about $1,000 one way or the other based on this? And if you knew that the only way you could get to a reasonable level of security is by a process like that you have to invest in, and that was your two choices, what would you do? Those 4 minutes, I have 100 hours of sales content, but that's basically what it is in 4 minutes, Wes.
So that, if you're listening to this, the best thing that I can tell you, that was just recorded. That is gold right there. And what I would do is I would go pause this. What were we at right now? What I can't tell. We're at 37:10 is where we're at, right? So just go back up to about 34 or something like that. Hit pause, replay that, learn, because Gary, that's really valuable. I think we're missing a lot of times just the practice of how to have those conversations. Yeah. Like when I'm hearing that as a practitioner and you spoke to me like that, I'm like, yeah, he's right. That makes total sense. David, what do you think?
No, it makes sense to me. Yeah, I think that, the obstacle to getting customers to move is lots of times on the sales side. Do they have confidence in the message? Do they have a repeatable message? Or do you have wildly varying where one guy seems to hit his number all the time, and that's because he's got this script down like Gary just did, and you got these other guys that can't articulate it? Well, how can you make that something prepackaged that any of your team can reproduce and have that same conversation? And, it's kind of that classic thing, right? You want to uncover the pain and then stick your finger in it. So how do you identify that, and how do you get it to move it along instead of it becoming this huge, long, drawn-out process?
Yeah.
Wes, here's what I always tell people I train in sales. Look, there's a truth that exists, right? There's an undisputed truth. And that truth is you do not get more secure by investing less with your MSP. Like, don't shoot me. I'm only the messenger. Okay. So, the customer can't change that. The low price provider can't change it. Only thing we can do is just explain to them. It's not a sales trick. We're just explaining to them what the reality is, that the least expensive thing they can do, if they want to be more secure, if they want to be more productive, if they want to have technology fuel their strategic direction, they got to be able to pick a vendor that has the right process, and there's a price to pay for that. but it always yields results. And we're such a small cost compared to all their other costs. Once you feel that way, Wes, everything changes, man. Because I was on the other side when I started, where I couldn't close a door.
Well, I would usually jokingly start, Wes, lots of times with them, like, hey, have you ever Googled any ailment that you have? And they'd chuckle, and I'm like, what always happens? You die, right? Whatever you Google, I have a hangnail, and if you Google I have a hangnail, you're gonna die, right? It's gonna tell you that it's gonna get infected, it's gonna go systemic, and then you're gonna die. That whatever you Google, you die, right? But my point on that is like that's the security stuff. To Gary's point, if you don't treat it, it's going to get worse, right? It's not just magically one day you're going to wake up and your environment's going to be more secure, right? There are infections in your environment, and left untreated, they're just going to fester and get worse until someday they have to be dealt with. But it's not just magically going to get better, and you go hire some cheaper dude down the street and his service is going to magically make them, better either.
Yeah.
Wes, David asked a good question before, but I don't think we ever really finished it. Wes, David, you said the one thing you hear a lot from salespeople and all the providers you dealt with is they come back and say, well, I go tell them I want to do some stuff with security, and they tell me, I thought you were already doing it, right? You mentioned that, and then we kind of moved on from it. And, I'll tell you how you can weaponize that. One, you just tell them like, well, yeah, do you think the threats are the same? They're not the same as they were 10 minutes ago. And if you want to be up on that, come to the cyber call every week with us. And you'll have confidence about what's going on with those, with those threats. But the other thing you can say, hey, when was the last time that you had a price increase from your current vendor? Okay, it's been 2 years. Do you think they need to be doing more for you than 2 years ago? Do you think that that security risks that we're dealing with are the same now as they were 2 years ago? So you really just almost every objection you get should be the reason why they would invest more with you.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes, indeed. And I can even give a little technical backup to exactly that. I mean, threats are changing. One of the reasons we did the Perch Security Threat Report that we did last year, I guess for the 2020 report, is for that exact reason, Gary, is if you look at the past 3 years, MSPs are under attack like never before. Their clients are under attack like never before. Bad guys, and we're talking household name bad guys like the Soden guys, right, is a good example. They understand the MSP. They understand the tools you use. They know the RMM. If you give a bad guy like that full and unfettered access for just a few minutes to the RMM, they will toast and ruin everything. That's just what they're good at it. So you're right. And that's the reason we produced that report, is to bring evidence to that so people could see as an MSP, whoa, it has changed for me. And the old days of doing security for an MSP are no longer the days today. Wouldn't you agree with that, David?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's crazy how fast it changes, and staying on top of it. I mean, you look at all the trends that have impacted technology, none of these things, this has only existed since 2007, right? And so it's really not that long, and how much we've all had to adapt just to those. And so you look at the amount of business innovation that was crammed in about 3 weeks in March. Think about some of these companies that sent their people home. If you had said, hey, we want a work from home strategy for some of these companies, it would have taken them a year to convene committees and to hire HR people and to create legal policies and all that stuff. And they freaking did it in 3 days. They just sent everybody home. And so, I think Gary makes a great point. The amount of innovation and changing that's happened just in 2020 is enough to say, man, there's no way we could charge you less. We ought to charge you more, because before we just supported Gary's PC sitting at his desk, and now we support Gary's PC at his desk, the one at his house, the one at his lake place. It's like everybody's gone all these different kind of places. It put a ton of pressure on the infrastructure. So yeah, I'm in complete agreement that the evidence of change is all around you, and that should only drive more price increase, not less.
Yeah,
it's not more efficient delivery model.
Wes, I've worked with so many people, right? And what I saw last quarter in a pandemic, we just had our peer meetings last week. 35% of our peer members in a pandemic threw over 20% net to the bottom line. I ran my first MSP at 33% net profit for only one reason. All the way through it, we made standards really the core of what we did, and we based our VCIO process on that, and that allowed us to create separation in the sales process, drive higher prices, have command over our costs, so we knew we were at 70% gross margin. But all of it really, it was my one good idea, right, that I ever had way back when, that we stuck with to become the best at that. And I've ridden it for 20 years, and with all these changes in security, it's just enhanced it, because we back then we were developing our standards. Now, in addition to that, we're being handed these standards that have all this credibility in the security world that we can leverage.
Yep, that's good. That's really good. And that actually gets close to another question I want to ask both of you. And it's this question right here is, when we start talking about selling and we're doing like what you're talking about, kind of figuring out what gross margins are going to be and how we're aligning this and what goes into the stack, a big question I think we often have, and I'll throw it out to, I guess, both of you, but Gary, I'll let you start. When it comes to selling security, are we selling a solution, a suite, a tool? And I'd be curious to know in the chat what you guys currently feel like you are selling today, a solution, a suite, a tool. So Gary, give us some feedback on that.
Yeah. So here, look, it's changing fast. So MSPs they always usually start off selling a tool, then maybe they turn it into a solution, then it goes in the stack, right? Like historically, that's what happened. Right now, you really need to decide what that base level is you're offering everybody, and you need to figure out, hey, based on the tool stack I want to have, and think of it this way. Your tools probably should be roughly between 25 and 30% of your overall seat cost, right? And so if you know what your labor should be on average, like we have a calculator that we give people. Andrew, if you want to post it, it's truemethods.com/price, where you can calculate your seat cost. Then what that gives you a framework to say, okay, based on that, how do I prioritize my tool stack to get to where I need to get to? And then anything that doesn't fit in there, maybe that would be my premium offering. So you have some organized lens by which, because if you're just out there selling different products and different one-offs and tools to every customer, you're probably going to be less secure, not more, because you don't even have standards.
Yep, David?
Yeah, so I'd say that there's this, I live in Birmingham, Alabama, and there's this bar here called the Collins Bar, and it's kind of those hipstery bars. And they don't have like a drink menu at all. They just have all of these alcohols along the back, and they're mixologist guys, they just want to talk to you. Like, what kind of stuff do you like? Do you like it sour? Do you like clear? Do you like dark liquor? And they make something special for you each time, right? And that's kind of the way that we like to think about this, is that the end user gets bombarded all the time with all these different vendors, multi-factor authentication, dark web scanning, all this stuff, right? And so if each one of those vendors represents something on the wall behind you, it's really about talking to your client. Like, okay, what do you need, right? What is your compliance environment? What is your regulatory environment? Do you have rules you must adhere to, and then others that are a good idea? And then you find out that, and then you mix them a cocktail with all the tools that you have that's for them. This one-size-fits-all approach of advanced security is kind of hard because there's not. But that's also a great opportunity to create differentiated value, because the client doesn't have great expectations around what that cocktail should cost, right? Is they don't know, kind of like we've talked about a million times, is that all-in seat price, people kind of know what that might cost, but there's not kind of that expectation, that whole red ocean, blue ocean idea around what advanced security tied to compliance might cost, And in fact, lots of times I think it's really, really expensive, and it might be, but I think the more bespoke you can kind of get for them, where you've got great relationships, but you're tailoring it to what it is that they want to do, I think creates a lot of good differentiated value.
So Gary, in your mind, why do you think it is that most MSPs don't bake security into their offering already?
Oh, that's the easiest question you asked me. They got a math problem. Okay, they're out there at $120 or $130 per seat. You back off based on even half decent margins what your seat costs need to be, and when you look at the math, almost all the money they're taking in is going to solving tickets and alerts, right? Doing some professional services projects that bring in money. And at the end of the day, they don't have the budget to be able to do it, because proactive always gets squashed by reactive. Back in the old days, when I was actually going around the world speaking, I probably, before COVID, the previous year, spoke in front of 5,000 MSPs. And I always ask this question: how many people here, are a proactive MSP? Every hand goes up. I'm like, okay, how many people here have at least one, don't work with True Methods? You have at least 100% proactive service delivery role. Someone who doesn't do any tickets, respond to any alerts, and doesn't bill any hours. Almost no hands go up. And I'm like, lies, all lies. So basically, the MSP model wasn't built. So now we're asking the MSP to have a lot more level of command over looking at what their costs are by role and how to build in these roles, and then how to show the value to the customer. And that's a long way to go for a lot of MSPs.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, David.
Oh, I was just gonna say 100%. I just completely agree. That the price, that they're so scared, so many of them, to go ask their clients to pay more, and don't feel confident about selling the value of why they should pay more, that they, are just trying to protect what they've got right now and don't really look at the added value.
Yep.
Gary, one thing you said that really gets me thinking, and David, maybe you can elaborate on this too, is, Gary, you're kind of hinting that the way that we've always done IT, managed IT as an operational model, kind of smacks security in the face and doesn't quite, I don't want to say doesn't quite work, right? But it definitely is in disagreement with what we've typically done in the past, right? That's kind of what you were hinting at. David, have you seen the same thing in your experience?
It's a different mindset. I think that, a lot of the MSP mindset, when you're trying to scale your MSP, is built on this idea of like automation. We got to have automation. We have to make things easy, and all kind of stuff. And automated systems, easy, all stuff is not necessarily the answer for security, right? And security is hard and it's a heavy lift, and you may have to trade a little bit of automation to get a more secure environment. So yeah, it kind of runs counter from an operational, every MSP's job is what, to create operational leverage. If you want 30% EBITDA margins, you better have a lot of operational leverage. Well, the way to get operational leverage is to have systems do things, to have automation sitting behind it, and not have a human touching each little thing. A lot of the security stuff has humans touching it, and you're introducing complexity into an environment, and maybe slowing things down a little bit to make sure that they're more secure. So yeah, it runs counter to that.
Yeah, that's, Wes, you always come up with these little nuggets, and then I steal them and make them act like I invented them. But that's a great one, that concept that security runs counter, because if you really look at it over the past 8 years, for all this talk of proactive managed services, mainly what MSPs have done is change their billing model. Every day, if you looked in their office and had a camera over 10 years, people come in, they sit down, they open up their PSA, and they work on tickets. Like, that part's the same. And as David said, they've added some tools and some automation. Those two things aren't what security is about. It's about a lot of process, a lot of truly proactive roles, the standards, the alignment, the compliance, and that's not part of traditionally what MSPs have done for the past 8 years.
Yeah, and if I could have one kind of closing remark around that, is you have to make sure as an MSP that you're doing what you should to be secure before you go talk to your clients. And I always kind of talk about, you can't be the 400-pound personal trainer shoving a Big Mac in your face and washing it down with Mountain Dew about to teach someone how to lose weight, right? And that's the way MSPs are sometimes. They're strolling into their client environment weighing 400 pounds, shoving a Big Mac down. So let me tell you how you need to be more secure, Mr. Client. When they really have to shore that up themselves first, then extend that out into the client environment. That's so crucial.
No, I didn't
Right.
eat lunch, man. That burger is actually sounding good right now.
No doubt. No doubt. I usually miss lunches when I have these kind of afternoon things.
Yeah.
Hey, as we close, we've got about 3 minutes left. So we're going to kind of get into kind of closing comments here. But first of all, thank you for joining. I truly hope this has been helpful for you. This has been recorded, so you can go back at any time. You can listen to it. You can share it with colleagues. Hey, it would make the world to us if you just share it on LinkedIn as well. Just pop it in LinkedIn with the URL and say, man, this was a great session. I learned a lot about it. By all means, please use this. If anyone has a final question for us, now is your chance. Pop it into the chat. You've got two super smart people, and you got me that are along as well. And as Andrew is mentioning, cybernation.com, if you like the stuff we're talking about, this is what we do every week on Monday at 1 p.m. Eastern. We dive into these concepts and this stuff, and we bring guests on. So hopefully that's been helpful for you. Because look, we are all in this together, aren't we? This is something that all of us deal with, that all of us are tackling. We face a common threat, a common enemy. I can't say that enough. So as we close, David and Gary, David, I'll let you start first. Take us out on a closing comment that kind of pulls us back together for it.
Oh man, I just think that don't be intimidated by this stuff, right? Is that it is happening. You have to know your clients are looking to you for the answer. So don't be shy about it. Go get educated some, but start educating your clients so that they will act. That at the core, they have to. You know, everyone's at risk. Everyone's vulnerable. They're looking to you to help them. So figure out a way to get them to act and move and take those reasonable next steps.
Yeah. And you got to get moving. Like I said, I was with 100 of our peer members last week in our virtual peer meetings. And compared to even a year ago, to hear how many of their special projects and things are around security, they're on it. So you have to be on it. These are people that are, leaders, in our industry. And so get immersed in it. And I just want to say, Andrew Morgan, single-handedly this year, what you've done to help educate this industry about security, you've helped me and all of us with Cyber Nation, with the Cyber Call, with these kind of events. I'm just saying you are leading the way and helping MSPs get down the line on this. So thank you.
Well, thanks for the comment, Gary. But I have to say the channel and you guys, I've known David and Gary personally. I've known for over 15 years. Wes for the past 3 with Perch kind of market. You guys have all been very good to me over the years, so I'm just paying it forward and paying it back. I did put, thank you for those kind words, Gary. I did put a few URLs in. So the Cyber Nation is live. Sorry for confusing you, Wes. I kind of threw that in there. We just launched the Cyber Nation. Gary's in there, David's in there, Wes is in there as moderators. It's all the stuff that's going on with the Cyber Call will be posted there, the videos, how to get to the Cyber Call. Let's see. In terms of, well, Wes, I'll let you close out. A few things I'll just say. Cyberfish is offering a $500 promotion going on right now. They are talking about leading the way in terms of phishing with what they call human emulation technology. So try it out. There's a Protect Your House campaign. It's free. The link's down there. The CTF was kicked off yesterday. We had 145 or 46 competitors in there. We're going to be doing a lot more teaching. Even if you're beginning, have no skills around ethical hacking and forensics and things that could help harden your environments. There's going to be a lot more of that coming. And then we have 2 more days of just 1 hour per day. This was an awesome session. We'll make sure this is recorded. Well, it's automatically recorded, but I'll make sure it gets into the Cyber Nation as well. So with that, Wes, I'll let you take us.
Hey, look, we're a minute over, about to be 2 minutes. So thank you for joining. And Andrew, we already have folks that are joining in. I don't think it's going to focus, but I'm going to hit approve all to you people that just wanted into the Cyber Nation. I just approved you. Welcome. Thank you, guys. I can't wait to see you guys again. Thank you for your time. I appreciate that. And with that, we are signing out.
Cheers.